So good afternoon. Welcome to Alex Talks, Hamilton's version of TED Talks. I'm Margaret Gentry. I'm currently serving as the Dean of Faculty at Hamilton. We are fortunate to have a tremendous faculty of talented and dedicated teachers, scholars at Hamilton. And this afternoon, those of you in the room and those of you joining us online will have the opportunity to hear from 6 of them. We expect that today's Alex Talks will become an ongoing series in which we feature not just our faculty, but our alumni who return to campus as well. This afternoon's topics cover a broad spectrum from the arts to the sciences, to the social sciences, to the humanities. And each of our presenters will speak for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then take questions. So we have 2 talks scheduled simultaneously to start at 4:05, 4:35, and 5:05. And each of these talks will be archived on the Hamilton website, so if you were trying to choose between which talks you wanted to go to, you'll have the opportunity to see all of them on the website soon. So I want to extend my sincere gratitude to our speakers and to our audience for participating. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Professor of Music, Lydia Hamessley, who will talk to us about I Could Have Been a Contender, Leonard Bernstein, Marlon Brando, and the music of On the Waterfront. Lydia?
Thanks very much, Margaret, and thanks for inviting me to participate in this first Alex Talk. I'll be talking to you today about the film On the Waterfront and Leonard Bernstein and his wonderful score for that film. This is one of my favorite films of all times. I have many favorite films, but this is one of my most favorite. And the famous scene, I think, is really important in this film, particularly for the way that the music enriches this scene. And I'd like to start, actually, by asking everyone in the room, how many of you have seen this film already? Well, that's actually more hands than I expected. How many of you know of the line, I could have been a contender? Of course, every hand in the room goes up. Before we talk about the cab scene and the music for that scene, I should, though, give you a quick plot summary, particularly for those of you that haven't seen it. But spoiler alert, you will know what happens in the film after this talk. The film was made in 1954, and it's a really gritty story of crime and corruption on the waterfront among longshoremen in Hoboken, New Jersey, when the unions were really under the stranglehold of the mob, and the Crime Commission was investigating. We should talk about the main characters for the film before we get going. Terry Malloy is played by Marlon Brando, and he's a dock worker who is an unwitting pawn by the mob. He lures another dock worker, Joey, to his death. Charlie, played by Rod Steiger, is Terry's brother, and he's a lawyer and an accountant for the mob. And Edie is Joey's brother, the murdered dock worker, and eventually Terry's girlfriend. At the beginning of the film, though, she doesn't know about Terry's involvement in Joey's murder. The film was inspired by a newspaper series in 1948, and it was quite highly acclaimed on its release. It was nominated for 12 Academy Awards. It won 8, and you can see here the 4 most prestigious of the awards. But you'll notice there's a name missing from those awards. Leonard Bernstein is not there. He did not win, though he was a contender. In the mid-1950s, Leonard Bernstein was a well-known composer and conductor in America, one of the most prestigious conductors and composers in the country. And the producers of this film really wanted Bernstein to do the music. They were worried that the studio would shelve the film so that other films that they wanted to promote over it would get the attention. So they thought if they had Bernstein's name on this film, it was a shoo-in. They would have to show it. Bernstein only did the music for one film, On the Waterfront. Now, I know some of you were probably thinking, wait a minute, but what about West Side Story, right? Well, yes, there's West Side Story and On the Town, but these are film versions of stage musicals. They're not standalone film scores, which is a very different thing altogether. So it was just this one. Bernstein was really quite savvy, though, about making film music. And as you can see, he said here that film music was very fragmentary, and so he knew that he needed to write a score with only a few themes that would be intertwined throughout the film. And these three themes that we have here, the dignity theme, love theme, and violence theme, are the way that he integrated the score for this. And the violence theme is the one that, as you can imagine, plays the largest role in this film and the one that is going to be most relevant for the cab scene. So what I'd like to do is take a look at this theme with you briefly before we look at the scene itself so that you can understand how this theme works. As you can see here, Bernstein referred to this theme as a tugging, almost spastic motive of pain. This is not the full theme. This is just the four-note motive, the opening four notes of the full theme. It starts with the alto sax, and it has a rather kind of accented and jerky rhythm. You can see if you read music that it's a kind of short, long rhythm there. And it's the contour of this theme I want you to notice in particular. The fact that it starts mid-range, goes down just slightly, goes up a bit, and then another fall down. So we get that contour. That will be important. I'll let you hear what that theme sounds like quite briefly. Now, of course, that's only the opening motive. The scene that we'll look at will continue this opening motive, and the short, long rhythm will continue in the theme. It will be rising up throughout as it moves through, and then will fall precipitously at the end. And as you could already get a sense, there's a roiling sort of timpani and drum pattern underneath. I'll let you hear this theme by itself again once more. So this chromatic melody that we have in this, that stopping and starting rhythm, and the ostinato lines, that percussion line underneath, all create a sense of anxiety and really of impending danger. So at this point then, let's take a look at the opening scene. This is the first scene we see in the film, and you'll hear the full theme. And I want you to notice as well, toward the end of what we see, that you'll hear that four-note theme come back again in the lowest string instruments, just after Terry calls Joey's name. So you can listen for that. And that's done to counterpoint of the falling melody that happens at the end of the theme. At this point, as you know, Joey is lured to the roof, where he's then shoved off the roof and is killed. And Terry did not know that was what the outcome was going to be. He was quite surprised and shaken by that. Well, now let's go to the cab scene. I could have been a contender. For people who don't know the film, of course, as we just saw, everyone seems to know this line. And it's really entered our popular culture in many ways. These are just some examples of what you find when you Google, "I could have been a contender." And a lot of people say this line with a sense of joking and parody. But in the context of the film, this line is not at all funny, and it's not an empty boast. In fact, this is the full line that he states. And since that's a little bit small, I'll read it for you. He says, "You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody instead of a bum, which is what I am." And notice that that's really the point of the scene, is that he knows he's a bum. That's the emphasis. And the entire scene in this cab is Terry's turning point, where he decides to testify against the mob. Elia Kazan, who was the director of the film, said about this scene, "I wanted to show the moment when a man suddenly thinks of what he could have been, like everybody does at some point in their lives." And the music plays a big part in making this scene so important and so meaningful. I'll set up the scene just briefly for you. The mob boss has sent Charlie out to convince Terry not to testify to the crime commission. Terry is waffling still on this, and in desperation, Charlie pulls a gun on him. And Terry responds in sad disbelief that his older brother would stoop this low. This then leads them to talk about the time when Terry was a prize fighter and the mob forced him to throw the fight. Terry places the blame on Charlie and basically says, Charlie didn't look out for him. You was my brother, and you didn't look out for me. What Bernstein does with this scene is remarkable. He transforms the violence theme so that you can hardly recognize it, actually. So the clip of the scene I'm about to show, I'll talk you through briefly with the music. It opens with an agitated rhythm, then a dissonant chord that will appear. Then you'll hear the alto sax play that four-note theme that I'm sure you'll recognize easily. But at that point, the last note of the theme is going to expand and hold out, and it's going to grow into a lush, absolutely gorgeous melody. And I'm not sure I can find my cursor on there, but nope, I'm not finding it fast enough. So, well, wait a minute, here we go. Here it is. So what we see is that here we get a beautiful stepwise, lyrical, lush melody. It's in full strings, as you can see here. Has nothing to do with the violence theme. But then seamlessly, Bernstein moves in to the violence theme. And here you can see the four notes. Once there, here, then he connects it, gives us four more notes and four more, and you would really hardly recognize it. He then intensifies the beautiful lush melody in octaves. That's about the time that Terry is saying he's a bum. And so the emotionality gets ratcheted up, and then here again we get the four-note theme. So let's watch this scene, listening for how the violence theme is present, but almost unrecognizable in the lush music. I will cue you when the violence theme occurs so that you can hear it. And at the end of the scene, you'll also hear a really harsh version of the violence theme as Terry leaves the cab and Charlie is driven off to his certain death for not having convinced Terry not to testify.
How much you weigh, son? You weighed 168 pounds. You were beautiful. You could have been another Billy Kahn. That skunk we got you for the manager, he brought you along too fast.
It wasn't him, Charlie. It was you. Remember that night in the garden, you came down my dressing room and said, kid, this ain't your night. We're going for the price on Wilson. You remember that? This ain't your night. My night, I could have taken Wilson apart. So what happens? He gets the title shot outdoors in a ballpark, and what do I get? A one-way ticket to Palookaville. You was my brother, Charlie. You should have looked out for me a little bit. You should have taken care of me just a little bit so I wouldn't have to take them dives for the short-end money.
Well, I had some bets down for you. You saw some money.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. Instead of a bum, which is what I am. Let's face it. It was you, Charlie.
Okay. Okay. Now tell him. I couldn't find you. Said no one won't believe me. Here. You take this. You're gonna need it. You pull over. Take me to the garden.
So while Terry is accusing his brother of not caring enough for him, while Terry is finally naming the betrayal and his own loss of character, Bernstein weaves the violence theme throughout this beautiful melody. The music shows us how much the corruption and violence of their lives has tainted their relationship. And this scene, which is really quite an intimate, almost a love scene, a very tender scene between these brothers, is set to this beautiful music, completely saturated with the violence theme. The music of this theme, this scene, this cue, only appears one other time in the film. In this next scene I'd like to show you. In this scene, a few scenes later, after the cab scene, Terry and Edie are lured out to the street by the mob, where they narrowly escape being run down by a truck. The piercing violins are going to play the violence theme that's going to build to a loud climax as they run down this alley. They'll be able to duck into a doorway, and then at this point, the loud climax will give way to the beautiful, lush music again, and we'll get basically an exact reprise of what we've just heard. It comes in as we and Terry see Charlie's body hanging on a wall. And Terry goes to Charlie and lifts his body in a very gentle embrace as this most beautiful music in the film plays, again with the violence theme running through it. So I'll let you see this clip now. In the cab scene, Terry said that Charlie hadn't looked after Terry. And here we see Charlie has made the ultimate sacrifice for Terry, and now it's Terry that's looking after Charlie. It's the music that links these two scenes that brings home the idea of brothers looking after one another, even to the point of death. But where does that leave us with Edie and Terry? In one of the scenes near the end, they're discussing their future on the waterfront after Terry has testified to the crime commission and he's shunned by his friends and in even greater mortal danger. And in this last scene, Bernstein uses all three themes. The violence theme you'll hear at the beginning when Edie says that they're no longer safe on the waterfront. Terry isn't really paying much attention to her and he's looking out over the water. When he sees the ship, you'll hear the dignity theme come in. I'll cue those for you so you can hear it. And as she continues to beg him not to go to the waterfront and to try to get his job back, the love theme will come in. I'll cue that as well. The love theme and the dignity theme will play simultaneously as Terry makes a final statement about his newfound belief in himself.
Terry, there's no place that's safe for you now on the waterfront. Maybe inland, out west someplace. A farm.
Farm?
You could do lots of things, anything, as long as you're away from Johnny Friendly. And even the longshoremen, you try to help them and they just turn their backs and stick to their stupid D&D. Are they taking chances for you? Why should you? You're not even listening to me, are you? You're going down there. Just because John Friendly warned you not to, you're going down there. You think you gotta prove something to them, that you're not afraid of them or something. Well, go ahead. Get it over with. Go down and shape up and get yourself killed. You stupid pig-headed... What are you trying to prove?
They always said I was a bum. But I ain't a bum, Edie. Don't worry, I'm not gonna hurt nobody. I'm just gonna go down there and get my rights.
The director said, "This movie is about one thing only, a young man who loses his dignity and then regains it." Through these scenes, then, we follow Terry from the scene when he first names out loud the fact that he's a bum, through the payback that Charlie makes the ultimate sacrifice, to this scene when he finally is redeemed. Well, I've barely scratched the surface of this film and all of the wonderful moments in it, but I hope this has given you a richer understanding of this particular scene and the way the music works in it, as well as a little hint of how tightly constructed the music is for the entire film. I also hope that those of you who haven't seen it are inspired to watch this film, and those of you who have, go back and view it again, particularly listening to this amazing score by Bernstein and what that music can tell us about the characters and the moral choices they make in the film. So with that, I'll stop and have questions. I'm happy to answer them. Thank you. Yes?
Is this typically the way that films are scored? The composer chooses themes as they watch the film and then decide to run these themes in and out and intertwined throughout a film? Is that the way it's usually done?
Yes, so the question was about how composers usually make decisions about themes in the films. And this is, in fact, a pretty standard way of doing it. Bernstein was given a rough cut of the film, and he made the decision about the different themes and how he wanted to play them throughout. Up until about this time in Hollywood, a lot of films were made that used themes, the idea of different characters having a particular theme or idea. It's not the only way to score a film, and around this time in the 50s, people were beginning to get away from this idea and move into other ways of scoring. But it's pretty typical what Bernstein did here. And he seemed to have quite a lot of autonomy in that. Sometimes directors really want to have a lot to say about it, and other times they're happy to let the composer run with it. I think with Bernstein, they let him run with it. Yes?
You know, I mean, typically, film composers weren't given a lot of time to write the score. Do you know how long Bernstein had?
Wow, that's a good question. The question was, how much time did Bernstein have for this score? I don't know the exact answer, but he didn't start scoring it until the film was completed. So I'm sure he didn't have a lot of time. Sometimes composers are brought in as the film is being done, and so they can start getting ideas during the making of it and then kind of put the final touches on it at the end. But I don't think he had a lot of time. Max Steiner, who was a composer before this, often had 20 or 30 films he was working on at a time, and he was churning these out in maybe a week or 2 weeks. Bernstein probably had more time than that, but perhaps not very much more. Yes?
I'm curious because as I listen to this, one cannot escape the fact that Leonard Bernstein's mentor was Aaron Copland. And I'm curious to know if you had an opportunity to examine or search for any correspondence that Bernstein might have had with Copland in anticipation of composing a film score, something he had not done before, which obviously Copland had done in the 40s.
Right, right. The question was whether or not Bernstein had any correspondence with Aaron Copland, who was one of his mentors, who had done some film scores. And again, I don't know the answer to that. He's talked about being in touch with Copland and learning quite a lot from him, but I don't know about the specifics of whether they actually talked about scoring this film. What I can say is that Copland's approach was completely different than what Bernstein is doing here. Copland did not use themes necessarily for his films. The film of Mice and Men, some of you may know, he scored that. And we have a couple of main characters in that film, George and Lenny, and they don't get a theme. Each of them do not get a theme. He's scoring emotions rather than individual people. So if they did talk, and Copland said, don't use themes, Bernstein didn't listen. Yes?
What award
It won 8 Academy Awards. I had a slide here for 4 of them that was, I'm sorry, the question was about what awards were given for the film. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Marlon Brando, Best Supporting Actress, Eve Marie Saint. I believe Bud Schulberg won for the screenplay, and then a couple of, like photography, director of photography ones. So there were 8 in total that were given with 12 nominations. Bernstein got one of those nominations, but lost to Dmitri Tiomkin, who scored The High and Mighty. So, any other questions? No? All right. Well, I think we'll close with that, and thank you very much. I enjoyed presenting for you today. Thanks.